He sat alone near his window, watching the sky darken with evening clouds. It had become a routine now, sitting there at the same time every day, not because there was anything beautiful outside, but because the silence was easier than trying to explain to anyone how heavy his heart felt. Life hadn't gone the way he once imagined. He remembered a time when he had dreams, when he used to talk about plans and goals with excitement in his voice. Now those dreams felt distant, like they belonged to someone else entirely. He had lost things. Opportunities had slipped through his fingers. People he trusted had walked away. Even family didn't seem to understand him anymore. They told him to be strong, to endure, to keep going, but none of them saw him cry at night when the world was quiet. None of them knew how many times he told himself to just make it through one more day. It wasn't that he didn't believe in God anymore. He did, but believing and feeling God were two very different things. And it had been a long time since he felt anything except exhaustion. One night, after weeks of silent endurance, he finally broke. He sat on his bed with his hands covering his face. No tears at first, just a deep ache inside, like something inside him had collapsed. And then the tears came, hot and unstoppable. His shoulders shook as he cried, not softly, but deeply, crying from the place where hope had been drained. He looked up at the ceiling as if God were somewhere beyond it, listening. "God," he whispered, voice trembling, "if you still hear me, if you still care, give me a sign. Anything. I just need to know I'm not alone. I need to know you haven't forgotten me." The room was silent. No voice from the clouds. No vision. No sudden miracle. Just quiet. He wiped his face and lay back, staring at the ceiling. A part of him felt foolish for asking. Another part of him was too desperate to care. Yet, as he lay there, something small and subtle happened. A warmth, soft, gentle, began to rise in his chest. Not dramatic, not overpowering, just enough to feel real. It didn't come from outside, it felt like it came from within. It wasn't a voice, but a feeling, like words without sound. "Hold on, I am still here, just a little longer." He didn't know if he imagined it. But the warmth stayed, steady, quiet, true. For the first time in weeks, he slept without waking in the middle of the night. The next morning, he got ready for work as usual. Nothing outside had changed. His problems were still there. But something inside him was different, small, fragile, but unmistakable. A spark where there had only been ashes. As he walked along the sidewalk, his eyes were drawn to something white resting on the pavement. A feather, clean, untouched, small but pure. He didn't know why it caught his attention so strongly. He stared at it for a long moment. It felt out of place, like it was meant to be noticed. He picked it up gently. For some reason, he didn't want to drop it. He continued walking. At the next corner, a woman stood waiting for the light to change. He had never seen her before. She wore simple clothes and carried a grocery bag. The kind of face you would forget in a second. But when she looked at him, something about her expression made him stop. She stepped closer, hesitant, almost nervous. "I'm sorry," she began softly. I don't usually do this. I don't know why I feel I need to, but," she paused, gathering courage. "God wants you to know something. Something good is coming. Don't give up. Please, don't give up yet." Her voice was not dramatic, not theatrical. It was gentle, real. His breath caught. His heart froze. He hadn't told anyone about his prayer. He hadn't described his desperation. He hadn't said aloud to another person that he was at his limit. Yet here was a stranger telling him the exact words he whispered in the dark. He felt his throat tighten. His eyes filled. He nodded because he couldn't speak. The woman offered a small, sad smile, as if she understood more than she was saying. Then she walked away. He stood there, holding the feather in his hand, tears slipping down his cheeks as the street moved around him. Cars passing, people rushing, the world continuing like nothing extraordinary had happened. But something extraordinary had happened. He had asked God for a sign. And God had answered. Not with thunder or miracles, but with something quiet, personal, and unmistakably meant for him. He wiped his face again. This time the tears were not of despair, but relief. For the first time in months, he felt something he thought he had lost completely. Hope. Not the loud, confident kind. Just a small flame. But it was enough. Enough to stand. Enough to keep going. Enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, God had been listening all along. Days passed after the encounter with the woman, and though nothing dramatic happened immediately, something within him had shifted. He still woke up early for work, still took the same bus, still dealt with the same responsibilities, but now he carried a quiet expectation inside him. It wasn't loud or overly confident. It was gentle, like a small flame in a dark room. But that flame gave him warmth. He found himself praying again, but the prayers were different now. Before, his prayers had been desperate cries for rescue. Now, they were slow breaths of trust. He didn't ask for everything to change overnight. He simply said, "God, lead me." And somehow, those words felt stronger than all the begging he had done before. One morning, while having tea, he realized something. The heaviness in his chest that used to follow him everywhere had softened. It didn't vanish completely, but it no longer controlled him. Pain was still there, but it was no longer louder than hope. He returned to his life with a newfound patience. And slowly, very slowly, things began to move. The first change came unexpectedly. He received a call from a company he had applied to months ago. He had long assumed they'd rejected him. In fact, he had forgotten about it entirely. "Are you still interested in a position here?" the voice asked. He almost dropped the phone. Yes, I am." They scheduled an interview. He didn't know how it would go. He didn't pretend to be confident. But he walked into that office with steady steps, remembering the warmth he felt that night, the feather on the street, the words the stranger had spoken. The interview was calm, simple. He didn't force anything. He didn't oversell himself. He answered honestly, spoke clearly, and let the rest fall into God's hands. 2 days later, they called back. "We would like to offer you the position." The moment he heard those words, tears filled his eyes, but this time, he didn't hide them. He let them fall freely, silently thanking God. He had prayed for help. He had prayed for change. And now, it was unfolding, not in an explosion of miracles, but in a steady, natural way that felt undeniably guided. But the blessings didn't stop there. A friend he had once been close with reached out. They had parted on painful terms, misunderstandings forming walls between them. When his phone lit up with that familiar name, he hesitated. Then he answered. There was a long silence at first. Then his friend spoke, voice weighted with sincerity. "I'm sorry, truly. I didn't understand what you were going through. I should have been there." The apology broke something open, not pain, but release. They talked for hours, not erasing the past, but understanding it. Forgiveness flowed, slow but sincere. And then, a financial burden that had been crushing him for months resolved itself in an unexpected way. A refund he had been waiting for, one he assumed would never come, suddenly processed. The amount was enough to clear what had been keeping him awake at night. Just like that, the weight lifted. Little by little, the pieces of his life began to align. He realized something important. God hadn't abandoned him during the silence. God had been teaching him, strengthening him, preparing him. The delays had not been punishment, they were preparation. He began to understand why things took time. He remembered who he used to be when everything was easy, impatient, rushed, constantly comparing himself to others. But through the waiting, he learned depth. Through the struggle, he learned compassion. Through the silence, he learned to listen. He realized that the blessing wasn't just the job, or the restored relationship, or the financial relief. The real blessing was who he was becoming. One evening, he returned to the same window where months ago he had sat feeling alone. He stood there now with a quiet, thoughtful expression. The sunset outside was soft, the sky colored with warm gold and pink. He held the small feather he had kept all this time. Some might call it coincidence, but he knew better. He remembered the night he cried and asked for a sign. He remembered the warmth that came. He remembered the stranger's message. Every moment had been timed perfectly, not early, not late. He whispered softly, not a desperate plea this time, but a grateful acknowledgement. "Thank you." Life didn't become perfect overnight. Challenges didn't disappear forever. But now, he faced everything differently. With faith. Not blind, but lived. With trust. not fragile, but rooted. With strength. Not loud, but unbreakable. He discovered that God's way of blessing isn't always in grand displays. Sometimes the blessing is a whisper in the quiet. Sometimes it's a feather on the sidewalk. Sometimes it's a stranger who speaks words they didn't even know you needed. Sometimes the blessing is simply knowing that you are not alone. As the days continued, he found himself encouraging others, gently, sincerely, because he knew what it felt like to be one breath away from giving up. He became the kind of person who could look someone in the eyes and say, "Hold on. Something good is coming," and mean it, not as wishful thinking, but as truth learned through experience. Because he had lived it. And now he understood. The blessing had always been on its way. He just needed time to grow strong enough to receive it.